Hello and welcome to another episode of 10 Podcast Lane. In this episode, I stay close to home, where we look into the discovery of the Vampire Skeletons of Kilteasheen. But first, a very special bonus episode by my 7-year-old son.
Hi, my name is Devin. This is my podcast. Once I walked past a haunted house, and then I heard lots of coffins banging in the house. So then I broke in, and then I saw lots of monsters. Bye.
Well, that's going to be very hard to follow, but we're going to try. In 2007, archaeologists from IT Sligo made a startling discovery that would further question what we know of our ancestors and their possible beliefs in the spiritual and paranormal. In a project funded by the Royal Irish Academy between 2005 and 2009, archaeologists excavated 137 skeletons from a site containing over 3,000 skeletons, buried several centuries on top of each other in a site that overlooks Lough Key at Kilteasheen, Knockvicar, County Roscommon. As per Chief Archaeologist Chris Reid, the bodies were treated in a very violent and aggressive fashion. So what exactly is the story of the Vampire Skeletons of Kilteasheen? It's safe to say Ireland is considered a sacred, mysterious place, especially the West, with all its folklore, fairies and myths. In 2005, archaeologists were commissioned to find an ancient bishop's castle by the Royal Academy of Ireland that dated back to the 12th century. At the start of the work, they found what they hoped would be the suspected site of the bishop's palace. But what awaited them was a lot more sinister than that. Excavations began under flagstones near the site where the bishop's palace was thought to have been. Once the flagstones were lifted, they were confronted by what Chris describes as faces literally looking back at them. The skulls were crushed by the flagstones intentionally, like whomever had put the flagstones and buildings here knew exactly what they were doing, placing them over the burial ground. Which in fairness is not the most respectful thing to do. Within a small space of around 3 meters squared, Chris and his team excavated in the region of 35 to 40 skeletons piled on top of each other in what seemed to be quite shallow graves. This was just one of several discoveries. In another area where excavations were being done by the team, in 2 raised platforms, again they found that each one was filled with bodies. They came to the conclusion that the whole area must have been filled the same, and they surmised there had to have been around 2,500 to 3,000 remains in the entire cemetery. But this was not the only find. During excavations a little bit later, Chris was summoned to a body that one of the team were after uncovering, and what they found was different than anything he had seen before. Let's just say that this corpse was not buried in a respectful way and was quite a grisly, aggressive find. There was a boulder placed in the grave, and the legs were bent backwards around the body. The strange thing was, the boulder seemed to be placed to purposely disfigure and deform the skeleton. Now, usually burials are sacred, but this was different. The body was deliberately broken, deformed, and crudely placed. The more they dug, the more they found. The next find was just as astonishing. The body was broken and bound, and in the mouth of the skull was a massive rock. Then they found another beside it, same grave, buried with massive rocks in their mouths, were 2 more skeletons. There has to have been an explanation to why these remains were so brutally treated post-mortem. The 3 skeletons were removed for examination, and what they found was that not only in death were the bodies brutalized, but the same seems to have happened in life, with chunks of bone in the skeleton chipped and hacked away, as if murdered and chopped by swords. This would stand true to the time where warfare and battles were just part of daily life in society. It seems that for whatever reason, people were scared of what would become of the bodies in the afterlife, or even if they would rise again, and the stone in the mouth was a preventative for the soul leaving the body. Similar burials were found in the Czech Republic from in and around the same time period, where bodies were discovered weighed down with stones. Only those bodies also had massive nails embedded in the heart, shoulders and heels. A nail through the heart. That does sound like a famous way of killing a certain supernatural being, right? The general consensus is that people in the medieval times must have been afraid these people would walk the earth again, and were buried in such manners to stop this from happening. One of the bodies that was removed with the stone in its mouth was discovered after analysis to have been a male between 30 and 35 years old. He would have been a muscular man, shown by muscle markings on the bones. That was all the bones were giving up for now though. But one thing that was noted about the placement of the bodies was that they were at the edge of the graveyard, away from the other bodies, almost as if they were banished, not fit to be buried with the rest of the dead. This further reinforces the fact that the stones were intentionally and forcefully placed in the dead bodies' mouths. The name placed on burials like this are known as deviant burials, as the deviate from the normal Christian burial. This episode of 10 Podcast Lane is sponsored by Mix Chili. Mix Chili was born in 2010 with the release of its first sauce, Inferno Original, which made it onto Irish dinner tables, finally offering heat-hungry tongues something to talk about. And gratefully, they did. A decade later, they now have 12 sauces that range from mild hit of heat to blow your socks off burn, which are available across the globe. Their sauces are lovingly handmade in Wicklow, Ireland, from the finest chilies the world has to offer, and contain no artificial flavourings, colourings, preservatives or other nasties. Their sauces are wholesome and delicious, and your granny would approve, because she's got a bottle herself. So visit www.mixchili.com and order yours now. That's mixchili.com. www.mixchili.com MICSCHILLI.com. And now, back to the show. Christianity is one possible reason for deviant burials. When Christianity arrived in the UK and Ireland, it was around 650 AD, which compares pretty well to deviant burials of Kilteasheen, and especially brutal deaths and burials that are found at this time. Almost as if pre-Christianity beliefs and worship were punished and considered evil, therefore they would be desecrated, a fear that they would return, and the stones placed in their mouths, hearts being cut out and rocks being tied to distort the bodies, was to stop the corpses coming back to harass grudges or loved ones. This is not uncommon either for medieval people to believe in the occult or undead. They had a strong belief in the supernatural that the church further instilled, with souls going to purgatory after death and evil souls being tortured for eternity. Documents recovered from the medieval period tell stories of vampires and the undead that predate what we currently know as vampires. There is a tale from England from 1085, where two boys moved to the village of Drapewell. Shortly after they moved, and for unknown reasons, the two men were murdered and buried, only to be seen 2 nights later, walking the graveyard with their coffins on their backs. This sent shockwaves through the village, as numerous people had witnessed the living dead walking revenants. Revenants are essentially the undead that would return to haunt and harass the living, calling their names at the witching hour, only for the people they would call to mysteriously die days later. The majority of the villagers of Drapewell up and left, but the few remaining got permission from the bishop to exhume the 2 bodies of the 2 dead men. What is documented that they seen was shocking. The bodies were untouched and still in the coffins, but the mouth of the cloth used to cover their faces was ripped, and fresh blood was around the mouth. The bodies were immediately beheaded, and the hearts removed and burnt on an open fire. It was as if the dead bodies were executed after death, with 2 black crows rising from the ground after the execution. Now, this is documented, but obviously has to be taken with a pinch of salt. But for the time, this also may have been very real and very fearful. Was this a similar fear for the 3 Kilteasheen bodies? This is just one of hundreds of similar stories documented in Europe by scholars, monks, and priests. After further analysis on the Kilteasheen skeletons, carbon dating proved the bodies were dated to the late 7th century, somewhere between 720 and 750, several hundred years before any other writings of vampires existed. Strangely enough, there are penitential scripts from the 8th century that state that anyone who believes in vampires or the living dead should be banished from the church. So the belief in the undead must have been very strong at this time, as there was a need to put it in writing. Archaeology and history overlapping to confirm this fact. John Burke, the current owner of Kilteasheen, believes it is a very sacred place, as did his father. He believes the bodies should be laid to rest and respect placed on the burials, who were local ancestors of the time, and he is privileged to have such a site on his land. Whether you wish to believe this or not, it does not matter. These were bodies that were actually discovered, with documents to back possible reasons. One thing is certain though. Something made our ancestors believe in vampires and the Walking Dead. And that brings us to the end of another episode of 10 Podcast Lane. This was a fun episode. I remember seeing something about this and thought I just had to investigate it a bit further because, pretty crazy. Not to do with the normal true crime and all that, so bit of a step away, but it's good to have a bit of variation, am I right? First and foremost, I want to thank my son for the amazing intro. 7 years old and he knocked it out of the ballpark. And secondly, I'd like to thank the new sponsor, Mixed Chili. Like literally, hand on heart, best sauce you're going to have. And we're going to have giveaways coming up as well. So watch the Instagram for that. More episodes coming next week as well. I'm trying to keep ahead and record ahead of time. So shouldn't be too much longer. There shouldn't be any big spaces like without the episodes. But as always, I appreciate everyone. Also, I've recently changed to Spreaker from SoundCloud for my RSS feed for the podcast. So if you do find that for some reason you're unsubscribed wherever you do subscribe from, please resub and resubscribe again because that'd be appreciated. So until next time, as always, aim for the bushes.